A small-town mechanic saved a kitten that held the key to curing his wife's illness, though Jack Morgan wouldn't realize it for weeks to come. Standing in the pouring rain that Friday evening, his weathered hands black with grease and trembling from exhaustion, all he knew was that the pitiful mewling coming from beneath Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick couldn't be ignored, even if he was already running late. "Hang on there, little buddy," he murmured, his voice nearly drowned by the drumming of rain against the garage's metal roof. Lowering himself to the cold concrete, Jack ignored the puddle soaking through his jeans as he peered into the darkness beneath the car. Two frightened eyes glinted back at him, luminous with fear. 20 minutes and several scratches later, Jack cradled a soaking wet ball of orange fur against his chest. The kitten was barely larger than his palm, ribs visible beneath matted fur, shivering violently. Its tiny heart raced against Jack's calloused fingertips, a frantic rhythm that stirred something protective in him. "Should have just called animal control," he muttered even as he grabbed a clean shop rag and gently dried the trembling creature. The small animal's vulnerability pierced something inside him, a tenderness he'd been struggling to maintain these past 6 months as his life crumbled around him. Jack glanced at his phone. 7:43 p.m. 3 missed calls from Mercy General Hospital. His stomach clenched as he dialed back with one hand, still cradling the kitten with the other. "Mr. Morgan?" The nurse's voice held that practiced professional compassion he'd grown to dread. "Your wife was asking for you. She's had a difficult afternoon, but she's resting now." "I'm on my way," Jack said, ending the call before his voice could betray him. He stared at the kitten, now purring weakly against his palm. He couldn't just leave it here. The animal shelter was closed, and the little thing needed food, warmth, a chance. Much like Emily needed a chance. A miracle. Something the doctors had gently suggested he shouldn't expect. With a deep sigh that carried the weight of months of helplessness, Jack tucked the kitten inside his jacket, locked up the garage, and stepped back into the rain. The clock on his dashboard glowed 7:52 p.m. as he started his truck. The engine's rumble mixing with the soft vibration of the kitten's purrs against his chest. "Guess we're in this together tonight," he whispered, pulling onto Main Street, the windshield wipers beating a hypnotic rhythm against the glass as Millfield's modest skyline disappeared in his rearview mirror. The hospital corridors were the same as always. Too bright, too sterile, haunted by the lingering scent of disinfectant that failed to mask the underlying notes of sickness and fear. Jack nodded to the night nurse, Maria, who had become a familiar face during the countless evenings he'd spent in room 317. "She's sleeping," Maria said softly, her dark eyes drifting to the subtle movement beneath Jack's jacket. "Is that?" "Don't ask," Jack said with a weary half-smile. "Hospital policy, right? No animals?" Maria glanced down the empty corridor and leaned closer. 10 minutes, and if anyone asks, I never saw a thing." She squeezed his arm gently before continuing her rounds. Emily lay motionless beneath the thin hospital blanket, her once vibrant chestnut hair now dull and thin against the stark white pillowcase. The soft beeping of monitors provided a mechanical heartbeat to the room. 6 months of aggressive treatment for the rare autoimmune disease had hollowed her cheeks and dulled the sparkle in her eyes. But even in sleep, her face held the gentle determination that had made Jack fall in love with her 15 years ago. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, his rough hands hovering uncertainly before he allowed himself to brush a strand of hair from her forehead. The kitten shifted inside his jacket, and Emily's eyelids fluttered open. "You're late," she whispered, her voice raspy from medication. Despite everything, a small smile touched her lips. "Did Mrs. Peterson's Buick finally give up the ghost?" "Not quite." Jack unzipped his jacket slightly, revealing the kitten's tiny orange head. "Had an unexpected customer." Emily's eyes widened, the first genuine surprise he'd seen there in months. "Jack Morgan, did you smuggle a cat into my hospital room?" The kitten, as if understanding its cue, let out a pitiful mew and wriggled out of Jack's jacket onto the blanket. Emily's thin fingers reached out, trembling slightly as they stroked the orange fur. "He was stuck under a car." "Couldn't just leave him there." Jack cleared his throat, suddenly emotional at the simple sight of his wife's smile as the kitten nudged against her palm. "He's beautiful," Emily whispered, and for a moment, just a brief, shining moment, the room seemed less clinical, the machines less ominous. The kitten curled up against Emily's side, its loud purrs seemingly too big for such a tiny body. "What will you name him?" Emily asked, her eyes growing heavy again as the evening medication took hold. Jack hadn't planned on keeping the cat. Another responsibility was the last thing he needed while working 14-hour days to keep the garage running and pay the mounting medical bills. But watching the gentle rise and fall of his wife's chest as she drifted back to sleep, her hand resting protectively on the kitten's small form, he didn't have the heart to say so. "Ah, I'll think of something," he promised softly, though she was already asleep. When the night nurse returned 15 minutes later, she pretended not to notice the orange fur on the blanket or the small carrier Jack now clutched alongside his worn leather jacket. "See you tomorrow, Mr. Morgan," she said, kindness in her eyes. "Jack," he corrected automatically, as he had dozens of times before. "After 6 months, I think we're past formalities." The drive home was silent, except for occasional mewls from the carrier on the passenger seat. Jack's modest 2-bedroom house sat dark and unwelcoming at the end of Maple Street. He hadn't bothered with Christmas lights this year, unlike the neighbors whose festive displays only emphasized the emptiness of his own home. Inside, dust had gathered on the photographs lining the hallway. Emily laughing on their honeymoon in Florida, both of them covered in paint when they first bought the house. Emily in her classroom surrounded by her 3rd-grade students. A life paused, waiting to resume or change forever, hanging in an unbearable limbo. Jack set the carrier down in the kitchen and opened its door. The kitten cautiously poked its head out, whiskers twitching as it surveyed its new surroundings. "Just for tonight," Jack told it firmly, setting down a bowl of water and some tuna from the nearly empty refrigerator. "Tomorrow we figure something else out." But as he lay in bed that night, the kitten curled into a warm ball on Emily's pillow, Jack found himself reaching out to stroke the soft fur. The steady purring filled the room that had been too quiet for too long. What would Emily name you? He wondered aloud, and for the first time in months, he fell asleep without staring at the ceiling for hours, tormented by what-ifs and worst-case scenarios. Morning brought weak winter sunlight and the unexpected sound of something crashing in the kitchen. Jack bolted upright, momentarily disoriented, until he remembered his small orange guest. He found the kitten sitting innocently beside a fallen mug, batting at the handle as though it were entirely blameless. "Already making yourself at home," Jack muttered, but found himself smiling as he cleaned up the broken ceramic. The kitten followed him around the kitchen, weaving between his legs as he made coffee, its orange tail held high like a signal flag. By the time Jack needed to leave for the garage, he'd already called the vet for an afternoon appointment and stopped by the corner store for cat food and a small litter box. "Just the basics," he told himself, "until I find him a home." The garage was quiet for a Saturday, giving Jack time to catch up on paperwork he'd been neglecting. Around noon, the bell above the door jingled, and he looked up to see Dr. Eleanor Winters standing in the doorway, her silver hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. "Doc," Jack greeted her with surprise. Eleanor had been Emily's physician for years before referring them to specialists when the mysterious symptoms began. She still checked in regularly, though Jack suspected it was more out of friendship than medical necessity now. "Thought I'd find you buried in work," she said, setting a paper bag on the counter. "Brought you lunch. Real food, not those vending machine sandwiches." Jack wiped his hands on a rag, suddenly aware he hadn't eaten since yesterday. "You didn't have to do that. Somebody has to look after you while you're looking after everyone else." Her sharp eyes took in the dark circles under his eyes, the weight he'd lost. "How is she today?" "Same." The word carried all the helplessness he felt. Maybe a little brighter last night, but he trailed off, not wanting to admit how desperate he'd become for the smallest signs of improvement. Eleanor nodded, understanding in her gaze. "And how are you, Jack?" He shrugged, unwrapping the sandwich she'd brought. "I've got a cat now, apparently." Her eyebrows rose with interest. "That's unexpected." Jack found himself telling her about rescuing the kitten, about smuggling it into Emily's room, about the smile it had brought to his wife's face. As he spoke, something tight in his chest loosened slightly. "Sounds like exactly what both of you needed," Eleanor said when he finished. "What's the little fellow's name?" "Haven't decided yet." Jack hesitated. Emily should name him if... He couldn't complete the thought. Eleanor's hand covered his briefly. "Why don't you bring him when you visit today? I could write a note. Animal therapy has documented benefits." "You'd do that? For Emily?" "In a heartbeat." Eleanor smiled. "I've seen stranger things work wonders, Jack. Never underestimate the healing power of connection." That afternoon, with the kitten freshly examined by the vet and declared healthy despite being underweight, Jack entered Mercy General with a small carrier and an official-looking note from Dr. Winters. The nurses exchanged glances but said nothing as he made his way to room 317. Emily was sitting up today, her thin frame propped against pillows, flipping listlessly through a magazine. Her face transformed when she saw the carrier. "You brought him back!" The delight in her voice made Jack's heart squeeze painfully. It had been so long since he'd heard that tone. "Dr. Winters wrote a prescription," Jack said with a small smile, setting the carrier on the bed. "Official animal therapy." The kitten emerged cautiously, sniffing the unfamiliar surroundings before recognizing Emily and bounding across the blanket to headbutt her hand affectionately. "He remembers me," Emily said wonderingly, scratching behind the kitten's ears. The purring started immediately, rumbling through the small orange body. "Did you name him?" Jack shook his head. "I thought you should do the honors." Emily studied the kitten thoughtfully as it kneaded the blanket with tiny paws. "Rusty," she decided finally, "because of his color and because he found you at the garage. Rusty it is." Jack agreed, watching as his wife smiled at the kitten. Rusty, who had curled up against her side as if he'd always belonged there. They spent the afternoon like that, Jack reading aloud from Emily's favorite novel while Rusty dozed beside her. Several nurses found reasons to stop by, cooing over the kitten and commenting on Emily's improved color. For a few hours, the hospital room felt almost normal, a space where hope might cautiously return. As visiting hours ended, Jack reluctantly prepared to leave. "I'll bring him back tomorrow," he promised, seeing Emily's disappointment as he gathered Rusty into the carrier. "Thank you," she whispered, reaching for his hand. "For saving him." Jack swallowed the lump in his throat. "Get some rest." In the days that followed, Rusty became Jack's constant companion, riding to the garage in the morning, visiting Emily in the evening, sleeping on her pillow at night. The routine gave Jack's days a structure beyond work and worry. He found himself talking to the kitten as he made breakfast, describing problems with difficult engines, even confessing fears he couldn't voice to anyone else. "What if the treatments never work?" he whispered one night, sitting on the kitchen floor with Rusty in his lap after a particularly difficult day when Emily had been too sick for visitors. "What if I lose her?" Rusty's only response was to press his small head against Jack's hand, purring steadily as tears dripped onto orange fur. 2 weeks after Rusty's arrival, Jack arrived at the hospital to find Dr. Reeves, Emily's specialist, waiting outside her room. The doctor's expression was unreadable as he gestured Jack toward the small consultation room at the end of the hall. Jack's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it, the conversation he'd been dreading for months. He clutched Rusty's carrier tighter as he followed the doctor, the kitten sensing his distress and mewing softly. "Mr. Morgan, Dr. Sonerun Servernaman Emanuelman," Reeves began once they were seated. "I've been reviewing Emily's latest test results." Jack nodded stiffly, bracing himself. "There's something unusual I'd like to discuss." The doctor pushed his glasses up his nose, studying the chart before him. "For the first time since her diagnosis, we're seeing a noticeable reduction in inflammatory markers. It's slight, but it's there, and it's consistent across her last 3 blood panels." Jack stared, not comprehending. "What does that mean?" "It means something is changing. Her immune response is modulating in a way we haven't seen before." "Doctor," Reeves leaned forward, "has anything changed in her routine? New medications, different foods, anything at all?" Jack's gaze dropped to the carrier at his feet, where Rusty had gone suspiciously quiet. Just the cat." "Doctor, Winters arranged for animal therapy visits." "Doctor." Reeves frowned thoughtfully. "When did these visits begin?" "About 2 weeks ago." Jack hesitated. "Is that important?" "Possibly. The timing aligns with the changes we're seeing." The doctor made a note in the chart. "I'd like to continue monitoring this closely. It could be coincidental, but what?" "There's emerging research about certain animal contacts affecting immune response. Most of it is preliminary, but," he shrugged, "at this point, whatever's helping, I'm not inclined to discourage it." For the first time in months, Jack left the hospital with something resembling hope flickering in his chest. He found himself driving not home, but to Dr. Winter's small house on the edge of town, Rusty's carrier secure in the passenger seat. Eleanor answered the door in reading glasses and a cardigan, surprise evident on her face. "Jack, is everything all right?" "Doctor, Reeves says Emily's tests are showing improvement," he said without preamble. "He thinks it might be connected to Rusty." Eleanor ushered him inside, taking the carrier and releasing Rusty, who immediately began exploring the living room. "Tell me everything he said," she instructed, putting on a kettle for tea. Jack repeated the conversation while Eleanor listened intently, her expression growing increasingly thoughtful. "There have been cases," she said finally, setting a steaming mug before him. "Rare ones where contact with certain animals prompted immune system recalibration. Usually it's about reducing stress, which has known benefits for autoimmune conditions. But occasionally what? Eleanor hesitated. There are studies examining specific proteins in animal saliva or dander that might trigger beneficial immune responses in certain individuals. Most of the research is preliminary, focusing on parasites or specific bacterial exposures. But she paused. It's not entirely outside the realm of possibility. Jack watched Rusty batting at a dust mote in a shaft of late afternoon sunlight. So you're saying this kitten might actually be helping her get better? Medically, not just emotionally? I'm saying we shouldn't dismiss the possibility. Eleanor's eyes crinkled. Medicine has many mysteries, Jack. Sometimes healing comes from unexpected sources. That night, Jack researched until his eyes burned, reading scientific papers he barely understood about feline microbiomes, immunomodulation, and Helminth therapy. The technical language was beyond him, but one thing became clear. There were documented cases where exposure to certain animals had inexplicably improved autoimmune conditions. Could Rusty be one such miracle? Jack watched the kitten sleeping on Emily's pillow, orange fur glowing in the moonlight. It seemed impossible. And yet Emily was showing improvement for the first time in months. The next morning, Jack called Dr. Reeves and asked if they could run more tests, specifically tests examining any unusual properties in Rusty's saliva or dander that might be interacting with Emily's immune system. The doctor had sounded skeptical, but agreed it was worth investigating. Looks like you're going to be a scientific study, Jack told Rusty as he fed him breakfast. The kitten merely blinked lazily, more interested in his food than in potentially being a medical breakthrough. For the next month, Jack fell into a new routine. Work at the garage, visits with Emily, whose color improved steadily, whose smile came more frequently, and weekly trips to the university research lab 2 towns over, where a team of immunologists had become fascinated by Rusty and his possible connection to Emily's improvement. It's remarkable. Dr. Lydia Chen, the lead researcher, told Jack one afternoon as they watched Rusty playing with a toy mouse while a technician prepared to take another sample. The protein compound in his saliva shows unusual properties we've never documented before. And the most interesting part? It appears to be interacting specifically with the markers for Emily's particular condition. What does that mean? Jack asked, watching as Rusty patiently endured having a cotton swab run along his gums. It means, Dr. Chen said carefully, that this cat might possess a naturally occurring compound that counteracts the exact autoimmune response causing Emily's disease. We need more time to isolate it completely, but she smiled at Jack's hopeful expression. The preliminary results are promising. By spring, the transformation was undeniable. Emily's doctors used words like remission and unprecedented recovery. The research team had isolated the compound in Rusty's saliva and were developing a synthetic version for clinical trials, though Emily continued to receive the benefits directly from the source. Rusty himself, who had taken to sleeping, curled against her neck during her increasingly frequent nights at home. I never thought I'd be grateful for Mrs. Peterson's ancient Buick, Emily said one evening as they sat on the porch swing, Rusty purring in her lap. Her hair had begun growing back thicker, and though still thin, her face had regained some of its former glow. If it hadn't broken down that night, Jack squeezed her hand, remembering the rain, the despair, the tiny mewling that had changed everything. Guess some things are just meant to be. Dr. Chen says they're naming the compound after him. Emily smiled, scratching behind Rusty's ears. RFP1, Rusty's feline protein. He'll let the fame go to his head, Jack joked, but his voice caught as he watched his wife laugh, a sound he'd feared he might never hear again. That night, as Emily slept peacefully beside him for the first time in nearly a year, Jack found himself unable to sleep. He slipped out of bed and made his way to the kitchen, where he found Rusty sitting on the windowsill, watching the moon. You know what you did, don't you? Jack whispered, running a gentle hand down the cat's back. Rusty turned to look at him with those intelligent eyes that sometimes seem to understand everything. You saved her. You saved us both. Rusty merely purred in response, butting his head against Jack's palm in the gesture that had become so familiar, so essential to their lives. 6 months after that rainy night at the garage, Emily returned to her classroom, thin but determined, her third graders welcoming her with handmade cards and a special cushion for Rusty, who had been approved as a classroom therapy cat. Jack expanded the garage, hiring 2 new mechanics to help with the increased business. Word had spread about the miracle mechanic whose cat cured cancer, though Emily was quick to correct that her condition wasn't cancer, and medical science had played a crucial role alongside Rusty's unique contribution. Dr. Chen's research team published their findings in a prestigious medical journal, bringing researchers from around the world to their small university lab. The synthetic version of RFP1 showed promise in preliminary trials for several autoimmune conditions, though Dr. Chen always reminded journalists that such developments would take years to reach patients. Some things can't be rushed, she told Jack during one of their now infrequent follow-up appointments. But your wife's case has opened doors we didn't even know existed. 1 year to the day after finding Rusty, Jack closed the garage early and drove home with a small wrapped box on the passenger seat. Emily was in the garden, her strength fully returned, planting the tomatoes they hadn't been able to grow last year. Rusty supervised from his favorite sunny spot, his once tiny form now filled out into a handsome adult cat. "Happy anniversary," Jack said, presenting the box. Emily looked up in surprise. "Our anniversary isn't until September." "Not our anniversary," Jack clarified with a smile. "Rusty's. 1 year since he came into our lives." Understanding dawned on Emily's face as she wiped her hands on her gardening apron and took the box. Inside was a custom-made tag for Rusty's collar, engraved with a simple message: "Miracle Worker." "It's perfect," Emily whispered, tears welling in her eyes as she attached it to Rusty's collar. The cat tolerated the attention regally, as though fully aware of his importance. Later that evening, as they sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the twilight, Emily rested her head on Jack's shoulder. "Do you ever think about how close we came to losing everything?" she asked softly. "If you hadn't stayed late that night, if you hadn't heard him." Jack thought about the countless small decisions that had led to that moment. Taking on Mrs. Peterson's Buick when he'd already been overworked, deciding to check on the strange noise rather than calling animal control, bringing Rusty to the hospital instead of the shelter. "I think some miracles find us exactly when we need them most," he said finally, watching as Rusty stretched languidly on the porch railing, his orange fur glowing in the last light of day. "Even when we don't know we're looking for them." Emily nodded against his shoulder, and they sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. The gentle rhythm of the swing matching their breathing, matching Rusty's purrs. 3 lives connected by chance, by compassion, by a small miracle that had begun with a simple act of kindness on a rainy night, when hope had seemed as distant as the stars now appearing overhead. In the soft glow of the porch light, Jack Morgan, small-town mechanic, husband, unlikely participant in a medical breakthrough, felt something settle in his chest, a certainty that had been missing for too long. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, stronger for having almost lost everything, grateful for second chances, and mindful of the extraordinary possibility that sometimes hides in ordinary moments of compassion. And Rusty, sensing the contentment of his humans, merely purred louder, as if to say that he had known all along that everything would be all right, that some rescues work both ways, and that the key to healing often lies in the connections we forge when we're brave enough to reach out a helping hand, even on the darkest of nights.